right. Welcome to the Week 1 mailbag for our class Business Writing English 245. I'm your host, Peter Castor. Each week I will answer questions that you folks have sent me via email. Please include the word mailbag in the subject line. Your questions should address course content for each week, the reading and the viewing. And the questions should be less pertinent only to you and more generally matters engaging concepts that could be valuable for the whole class. So let's get started. Our first three questions come from Anna. The first question, should a first draft contain details or just an overall idea? I think the best way to approach a first draft is have it be your best work you are prepared to turn in for a grade. That way, the feedback you get from your peers or from me will be things you didn't know you still had to do. So, for example, if you have a draft of your cover letter for your job application and you know that you haven't done enough research on the company yet, so you're not including enough specific details in addressing you, attitude, and building goodwill, well, then your peer reviewer and myself, we're just going to say, hey, you need to do some more research on the company, and you already know you need to do that. So it's not the most helpful advice. Your best bet is to have your best work. Maybe if you turned it in then, it would get a B or a C because there's things you don't know that you still need to work on. And that way, your peer reviewer and I, we can make those recommendations. Our next question, also from Anna, what part should be written first on an essay to facilitate the start? Yep. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but one approach could be, oftentimes we think we need to tell a story, we need to write an essay, we need to write a letter, the way that the Queen of Hearts tells Alice to tell a story. Begin at the beginning, and when you get to the end, stop. But it doesn't always work that way. Oftentimes, with an essay or a research paper, it can be best to begin with some free writing, then go back and identify what you feel the key ideas are, put those in some kind of order. Now we've shifted from drafting to organization. Then we might have a nearly done paper, read it, see what it is that we say, and then go back and as clearly as possible state that in our introduction. That might be one process, and that might be one means by which what comes first in the final product may be written last, because you at that point have a clear sense of what your overall project is and what it does. It depends, though. In an email, I often start out, if it's an email in a business environment, with what might be almost a throwaway comment, like remarking about the weather, or if it's in the context of school, where we are in the semester. This is a sort of what we might call phatic communication, P-H-A-T-I-C, phatic. So when you walk by somebody that you know in the hallway and you say, how's it going? And they say, fine. And they say, how's it going? And you say, fine. You're not actually asking each other how you are honestly doing. Indeed, if your friend walked by you and said, how's it going? And you said, actually, things are really tough right now because my car broke down and my mother's sick, right? Then you'd be kind of breaking the social protocol of that statement. So phatic communication is less actually trying to communicate anything in the language other than just acknowledging that the relationship exists. So an opening to an email that begins, I hope everything is going well with you right now, is just a way to acknowledge, to build goodwill. It's actually more common in many Asian business communities environments than it is in an Anglo-American context. Other times, though, when you're writing, you want to begin with some sort of hook, some sort of invitation, some sort of invitation for your audience to continue reading. And so in a memo, this would be stating as clearly as possible in our first sentence what the purpose of this communication itself is. So in that instance, the meaning itself is the hook. It's not something flashy that we're trying to say. So for example, not a memo, but in a formal letter, in your cover letter, your opening statement, if not the first sentence, one of the first two or three, should clearly indicate the specific position for which you are applying and what your qualifications are. So depending on the different genre, the different type of writing, what you begin with will vary, and when you write that beginning will vary. Next question, last question from Anna. Could you explain the paragraph structure of issue point discussion offered in the book and give some examples? Okay. So, issue. Not everybody's completing the mailbag assignment. Just half of you sent in mailbag questions. So that's issue, and issue is one of those kind of mealy-mouthed ways of saying problem. I'd rather just say problem. It's a problem that half of you didn't send me an email question for the mailbag. So the point is, well, the mailbag constitutes part of 15% of your overall grade. And so roughly there's, I think I've identified 5 mailbag submissions. And so, that's not right. There's 3. So each one's worth 1.1% of your overall grade. And so the issue is, the problem is, I have not received enough mailbag questions from each of you. So the point is, well, this is part of the class assignment. It's part of your overall grade. We want to make sure that we complete all of the required assignments. Now the discussion, why might this be challenging? It's possible that some of you are being confused by the sheer volume of assignments and how many things there are to turn in. And I'll do the best I can to make as clear as possible what is due in a variety of ways. So I will send email reminders when matters are due. I will typically do this on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday or Saturday. Then I will include on each week the matters that are due that week. And finally, if you go to the class assignments, you can look in there and you'll see a description of each assignment, and it'll indicate, how frequently you are to do this work. So that would be an example of a problem, point, and discussion in a spoken paragraph. All right, our next 2 questions come from Latham. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. When is it appropriate to focus more heavily on using text to explain data results? Is there ever an appropriate time to attempt to explain a large amount of data using only text? If so, is the major reason behind this the audience? I can understand representing data with images or figures given an unfamiliar group of recipients, but is it good business etiquette to attempt to discuss results using a larger section of text, more than 5 sentences, to a group that is familiar with the topic? Latham does a great job here emphasizing audience. It depends how well your audience understands the material being presented. So first off, never include an image or a visual graphic representation of data without accompanying text. A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but it still needs some words explaining what it is. So images, whether graphics or data in the form of tables or figures or charts, needs to complement the written description and analysis of the data, just as the written description and analysis needs to complement the data itself. Now, as for the relative proportion, one to the other, it kind of depends. Graphical representation of data is often simpler when it comes to, well, relatively simple matters of, say, proportion. So a pie chart which indicates that 75%, well, actually let's go with a pie chart which indicates that Apple controls, and I'm making this up, 70% of the cellular phone market. That's a startling graphic. That is this very significant proportion. And so that graphical representation tells that snapshot of a story much more rapidly, much more clearly than the statement, Apple controls 70%. Nevertheless, the declaration of 70% is more specific than that which is clearly indicated in the pie chart. The pie chart indicates most, but we do need the specific number. Where the text will expand isn't just in the representation of the data. In some cases, a table may offer the data much more specifically and clearly, and it would be silly to just reproduce those facts in the text itself. We might mention them. However, it's in the analysis that analysis needs to take place in the writing. So in some instances, if you can identify that the data is being represented best in a chart or table or graph, then you merely mention in the text more, less, the specific percentages or a particular number. But it's in the analysis that analysis will take place textually in your writing. Latham's second question is a matter of protocol. Yes, it says in the class mailbag assignment that the mailbag's due on Thursday, but then pretty much everything else is kind of due, for the most part, on Wednesday and Saturday in our in our part 1 and part 2 of each week. So officially, the mailbag is due Saturday. I'd like it on Thursday, in part so that I don't have to compile the mailbag on the weekend. I'm going to try not to work every weekend this semester. I'm probably going to fail with that effort. So I've made a correction to the mailbag assignment, and it indicates that the mailbag preferably is due on Thursday, but hey, if you don't get it till Saturday, send it on Saturday. All right, our next questions come from Brianna Patterson. What's some good advice so that we can influence our audience when they're reading our reports? Well, to recover some matters we covered in the video, Aristotle, in his definition of rhetoric, the art and science of determining in a given situation the available means of persuasion, indicates that there are three fundamental appeals, and then another one is sort of implied. So again, there's pathos, arguing for towards the emotions or perhaps the values and beliefs of the audience. There is logos, appealing to the facts and reasons of the matter. There is ethos, the authorial credibility of the writer or speaker. And then there is kairos, the right place and time for the message. All of these are implied as well in chapters in our textbook. So in terms of which of these is going to be most persuasive, well, we all know that facts and reasons should be the most persuasive, but appealing to the beliefs, feelings, and values of the audience is often most persuasive. In truth, it's best to use a combination of these. Now, there may be times where facts and reasons needs to be largely foregrounded. This is especially true if you don't have tremendous authorial credibility. So, for example, if you are a sophomore and you're 19 and you're signed up in this business writing class, your authorial credibility with regard to business writing probably isn't that great unless you've had a really extraordinary background for the past 5 years. So you're probably going to want to emphasize facts and reasons in attempting to make your case in your final project. But if you're a 32-year-old software engineer who's returning to college and has worked in the industry for a while, well then you can, so long as you identify that that's the case in your document, which is totally appropriate to do at times, then you would have much more authorial credibility. You would still, of course, want to rely on facts and reasons. So in the end, I would recommend using an appeal, all four appeals, making use of all four appeals to the right place and time, establishing your credibility. You can in part establish your credibility through your reliance on facts and reasons. And then finally, as appropriate and without sort of obviously pandering to your audience, recognizing their emotions, beliefs, and values. Next up, from Brianna as well, how do we reconnect with our audience if we lose track? Well, in the context of writing, it can be really hard to know when you've lost track of your audience. So in writing, since it's asynchronic, we write it, we give it to somebody we don't know when they read it, we're often not there when they read it. It's probably best to organize your writing using intratextual transitions, topic sentences, and then some extra textual cues of formatting that sort of keep your audience focused on where they are in your document, as sort of you are here throughout, so they don't get lost, because when they get lost, folks get confused and they stop reading. Next up, from William, how we would describe a rhetorical situation in my own words. Well, certainly a situation wherein rhetoric is used has existed as long as there's been communication. The term itself comes from Lloyd Bitzer, who defined the rhetorical situation in the 1960s as including an exigence, a reason for the communication taking place, a purpose, the purpose of the writer or speaker in enacting this communication, and the audience for that communication. So in the mailbag, right now I'm speaking a mailbag. And the exigence is, well, I told you I would do it. You had the assignment of sending me a mailbag question, and I thus have the assignment of responding to your mailbag question. So in effect, the exigence, the reason this communication is happening is because I said I would do it. And I'm responding to the questions you've posed, or at least the half of you who sent them in. Now that said, of course, the purpose is more than because I have to. The purpose of the mailbag is to foster the back and forth dialogue among students and teacher that would ordinarily take place in a face-to-face classroom. So this is one of the efforts I've engaged in to have what we might call a high-touch environment in a distance learning environment. So ordinarily when there's face-to-face interactions in a classroom, it's already high contact. And so in the distance ed, the frequency of assignments, my willingness to give out my phone number and encourage you to call me or email me with questions or for requests for guidance, and this mailbag itself, as well as the class discussion. These are all efforts on my part to make it a high-touch environment. And of course, the videos are part of this as well. Next up, question from Justin. I would like to ask your opinion on the section in Chapter 3 regarding putting what is familiar first. Do you think putting what's new could ever be effective in business writing? I was thinking new information could be presented first, and then old information could be put in with sentences throughout to create connections and understanding. The end of the paragraph could give the full perspective to make sure the reader understands. I have no intention of ignoring the advice of the chapter. I was just wondering if there was another way that was feasible. Certainly other ways are feasible. And in specific situations, it could, perhaps be better at times to begin with the new information. Even with new information, though, the presumption will be that the audience has some sense of the broader context. So, for example, and again, this is, imaginary, the Apple 8 release is delayed, right? If that announcement, if we're leading with new information, we don't necessarily need to lead with the Apple iPhone has been wildly successful in its versions 1 through 7, right? It's sort of presumed that the audience already knows that when we say the Apple, and indeed already knows that the Apple 8 is, the Apple iPhone 8 has been scheduled for leading with the new information. The Apple iPhone 8 has been delayed. And again, for those of you who are Apple aficionados, this is entirely made up. This is fictional. It's a fictional example. So, if the new information is so new that the audience doesn't have the context by which to understand it, then it would be not a great idea to lead with that new information. So an example of this would be in a, you're often accustomed to writing in school environments, say a 5 to 7 page paper. And in a 5 to 7 page paper, it's totally appropriate to have, as you're probably well aware, the first paragraph, probably the last sentence of your first paragraph, feature your thesis. This is a common sort of situation, a place. But even in that instance, it's the last sentence of the first paragraph. It's not the first sentence of the first paragraph most often, because typically your audience, your readers, need some kind of context for this particular thesis to make sense. Now, in the case of a book, so a 250-page book, the introduction may be 15 pages long, and the thesis may not be declared until page 10, because the author determined that there needed to be 9 pages of explanatory context before the thesis would make any sense. So these are situations wherein we have to give some information that's necessary for our specific point to make sense. So if we do lead with the brand new information, that still implies that our audience is sufficiently knowledgeable about the topic to, on their own, have some sense of the old information. All right, next up, we've got questions from Andrew. First, what exactly am I looking for in terms of sources for academic programs? Do you want a citation of the school's catalog for the program I'm working through? Yeah, that's exactly what I want. What I'd like to see in terms of documentation would be a citation from our academic catalog for your specific major. You might also draw from data, say from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which feature statistical projections for how whether a particular field is going to expand or contract in the near future. And there might also be documents from, say, for example, the Chronicle of Higher Education, which features information about higher education and the popularity of majors, etc. Second, as part of a career goal, I've thought about creating a second stream of revenue. For example, at some point I'd like to open a recording studio, something I'm passionate about, but also to make a little extra money. Is this something that will be relevant to the career report as part of my career goals? Absolutely. Now, on one hand, this is what career counselors, life coaches describe as a passion project. So you've got your job that pays the bills, but you have something else that you work on the side. This is how entrepreneurs often are able to launch a business without accruing massive debt, where they have their day-to-day job And on the side, they have a startup that they expand until they can leave their job where they're employed by somebody else, and now they're self-employed. The chat, and of course, if you hear ads from Uber, the whole tagline of get your side hustle on, make extra money in between your hours of your regular work. There's a bit of a challenge from that perspective, though. If you're doing it as an entrepreneur, great. However, the notion that, in effect, people in the middle class have to take on a second job just to break even and maintain their position in the middle class, that speaks of a larger illness of our economy. So absolutely, your career report should include side projects, so long as, again, you're trying to, you want, as much as possible, you want your career goals to be in line with your life goals. You want not just to be working to make money, you want to be solving the problems that make you feel satisfaction. People will say, do what you love and the money will follow. And that's just wrong, right? I love to lay on my couch and watch ESPN, and no one will pay me to do that. Now, you can watch ESPN and write about it, and you can become a blogger, and if you're sufficiently successful at building an audience, that can become your full-time job. And you need only go to the Gawker site, deadspin.com, to see folks who've built precisely that, careers watching and writing about television representation of sports and sports media. But people will pay you to solve problems. So the problems that I like to solve are working with undergraduates and seeing their writing improve, improving their ability to think critically about business writing, about contemporary American films, about 19th and 20th century American literature. And that's a problem that people will pay me to solve. That's my job. So in as much as possible, if you can get your day-to-day activities, ideally, to be almost indistinguishable from leisure time activities. So speaking with undergraduates about business writing makes me very happy, and it's fun. I would do it for free, and I think it's kind of cool that I get paid to do it. Of course, really I get paid to read the papers, and that's usually not as much fun. So I think that covers everything from the mailbag. This mailbag is a little shorter than they'll typically be because 6 of you did not send me a mailbag question. So please do. The matters covered in this pod will be part of our course content for week 2. So feel free to respond to them if you wish during class discussion on our shared Google Doc. So happy Mother's Day to you mothers out there. For those of you who have a mother, contact your mother if you can and tell her how much you love her. Unless you don't, in which case you shouldn't do that. And I'm sorry that that played out that way. Oh, that's kind of a bummer. Back to the happy Mother's Day to everybody. And have a great Sunday. Bye.